The data sets are remarkably scarce for New York. You have pretty good data sets for condo construction, but in terms of rentals, hotels, offices, other types of properties, very, very little exists. And even within the condo sector, which every residential firm does it, one firm will say there's 6,000 units under construction. The other firm says there's 9,000 units under construction. You look at the sale price, you look at the buildable footage, and the whole market thinks you just divide the sale price by the buildable footage and that's the value. But were there bonuses in place? Were there not bonuses in place? Did you have to buy the bonuses? How much did the bonuses cost? Did you have to pay for an easement? Did you have to pay for a right-of-way? Did you have to buy tenants out? What were the costs of those things? So all of a sudden, I sold a development site up on 77th Street and 2nd Avenue, and the real price per square foot is about $100 more than what the casual observer would think that was, because of all the additional costs that were involved in creating the site that exists there.
Okay, so thanks for joining us. Another episode of the Broker Brunch. Today's guest, we have the one and only Bob Knakal, sold over 2,300 buildings and is known as the GOAT in the industry. So thanks for joining us, Bob.
Pleasure to be here. Happy to be with you guys today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What a week to be in New York, right? I mean, it's the fall. It's October. You got the Yankees and the Mets. I was at a bar on Monday night. I was at a Bills bar. The Jets were playing the Bills. I feel like we're just completely spoiled right now. I'm walking around the streets. I see everybody has an extra pep in their step. Whoever you're following, right? Mets or Yankees, there's something to...
Yeah, lots of good stuff going on today. You know, people ask me, Bob, you've been in New York for so long, Mets or Yankees, Mets or Yankees? And I say, I'm a lifelong diehard Yankee fan, but I always want to see the Mets do well. In fact, my first memory of baseball was running home from kindergarten in 1969 to watch the Mets and the Orioles play in the World Series, because back then the World Series games were in the afternoon.
Okay.
They weren't at night, but always wanted to see the Mets do well, whether it's 69, 73, 86. And a lifelong diehard Giants fan, but always want to see the Jets do well. And lifelong diehard Ranger fan. I hope the Islanders and the Devils lose every game they play.
So you're a bit more passionate about the Rangers than the other sports. That's great. But listen, you are Mr. New York. You're Mr. Real Estate Brokerage. So it's a pleasure to have you on. I think that when we think about you, and we almost know you, we feel like we know you through social media at this point as well. But we feel like you've added that as a tool to your prospecting plan, right? And I think one thing that I would say has separated you maybe from the rest of the pack over 40 years is your commitment to a prospecting plan. And I'm just curious, how do you stay disciplined and focused, but also keep it nuanced that you're improving your prospecting plan as you go?
Yeah, well, Brian, as a broker, and if you follow me on social media, you know what I say is, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. Why do I say that? Because there are 250,000 people that own the 176,000 investment properties in New York. You can't possibly call all those folks, so you need word of mouth. You need people to know who you are and what you do. So I've always been focused on prospecting and getting your name out there, and what my good buddy Ed Winslow refers to as proof stacking, where you're constantly demonstrating that you've done transactions, you've helped people before, you've helped other people, you can help new people. And so a robust prospecting plan always has, number one, you have to make prospecting calls. But you have to do all the other things too. You have to do your email blasts, and you have to do your text programs, and you have to do hard mail. I think hard mail is very, very underrated, but has good shelf life. And especially now with people getting so many emails, I think a lot of emails get inadvertently deleted. So hard mail is important, but you have to do your networking and create content and go, do public speaking and write articles. And social media came along, and I only picked it up really in January of 23, but I thought, what a great way to get out to so many people in such an effective and efficient way. And, as I normally do, I try to look at things and do it a little bit differently than other people. And I saw a lot of brokers were posting stuff, hey, we just listed this, we just sold that, but not with that much detail. So I thought, you know what, everybody really likes to know what went on behind the scenes. What were the pushes and the pulls in the deal? What weird about the seller or the buyer, or what was unique about the deal, or what dynamics happened, what hurdles did you overcome. So, in my deal stories, I try to talk about all that stuff to kind of bring the reader along for the ride and how that deal played out. And every deal has, as you guys know, has twists and turns and interesting things that happen. And then also, going back to the MK days, I always tried to be a little motivational and inspire the troops. And so I try to weave a little bit of that into what I do as well. But it's been a great experience. I've been very, very happy with the reach social media has had, and the ability to access a very large audience very effectively.
Yeah, because I just feel like if you keep posting, oh, I just sold this, or
Gets boring after a while.
it gets so boring, doesn't it? And obviously, I mean, you want to get your product out there, but I think you've tapped into a really clever way of like putting a personal story twist. So everybody's still reading that you're doing deals or that you have done deals, and I think there's a subconscious element to that then, because you're bringing a personal element, which just makes it so much more enjoyable, I guess. Or like you've created a proper following in a relatively short time on social media.
Yeah,
right?
and I think one of the things that is misunderstood by some folks is that, I'm very, very conscious that everything that we do is all about helping the client.
Right.
Why are we here? We're here to get a better result for the client, better execution for the client. And so I think by doing all these market presence things, I think people who misunderstand it say, oh, Knakal has such a giant ego. He's got to be here. He's got to be there. He's got to be on TV. He's got to be talking here. It's not about my ego. It's about me wanting to do everything I possibly can to put me in a position to potentially meet that one buyer who's going to pay more than anybody else, or that one person who has the expertise to overcome an issue that's going to get my client a better result on a deal. And if you think about everything that we're doing is trying to get better results for our clients, I think that's very noble. So I think if you think, hey, this guy's an egomaniac, he's doing all this stuff to get out there. Well, yeah, I'm doing all this stuff to get out there because I want to get a better result for my client than somebody else does.
I was with a potential buyer of one of your listings the other day, actually. He was saying, I'm trying to buy this deal from Bob, and he keeps pushing me on the price. I said, that's why he's the best at what he does, because he's getting his clients good money. And he kind of finally got it and sort of resonated. But another topic I wanted to discuss was discipline, which you briefly mentioned. Do you feel like you were like born with some innate ability of discipline, or do you feel like that's a skill that you've developed and learned over time?
No, you know what? That's such an interesting question. And when you see that I write about discipline, I think discipline is one of the three characteristics that I see in brokers that do absolutely the best. Number one is expertise. You have to be a real expert at something narrow enough you can know everything about it, but big enough you can make a great living doing it. Second is passion. Passion, because no matter how good you are, you're going to have tough times. If you don't love what you're doing, you're going to give up, not be around for the good times that will follow. But the third thing is discipline. And when I talk about it, I always say it's those who use discipline the best, not those that have discipline. Discipline is not something you have or don't have. Everybody has the ability to be as disciplined as possible. But it's how you choose to use it, if you choose to use it. And I know, your background, you guys spent a lot of time with Paul, and he tells about the Stonecutter's Creed, right?
Yeah,
Stonecutter hits that piece of stone with the mallet 99 times and nothing happens. And 100th blow, rock splits in half. And the casual observer looks at that and says, you know what? That 100th one had to be different. It was a stronger hammer. It was a harder blow. It was a different angle. And the stonecutter knows, no, that's not the case. It's the 99 blows that came before that allowed that 100th one to work. And in the same way, you have to have the discipline to keep doing the very basic fundamental things over and over and over again. These things are not glamorous, right? It's not all exciting.
Yeah.
Making your calls, not exciting. Doing your content, reading your articles, doing all this stuff. A lot of times it's not exciting stuff, but if you do those basic fundamental things, day after day, week after week, month after month, eventually the rock is going to split in half. And you just have to be able to use discipline. And I love the quote from Abe Lincoln, who said that discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. And you have to think, look at the big picture. Hey, I want to achieve a certain status within the real estate world. You have to have the discipline to keep doing those things over and over and over again. So I don't think it's something you're born with. I think it's something that you make a decision about what you want most and how much you're willing to devote to achieving that objective.
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And I think when we say, do you have discipline or did you learn how to be disciplined? When you and Paul teamed up back in the 80s, I mean, it sounds like from the stories, and it's been well documented, you know, you met at the coffee machine or at the cooler, right? And it was like, team up together or else we're going to get eaten by these older guys. So you went out and you got disciplined, but nobody was saying like, here's a manual of what you need to do every day, or here's the roadmap for how you get from A to B. But
yeah, well, you know what? To CB's credit, they wanted to implement a territory plan, but they just didn't. The bosses didn't implement it. Mm-hmm. They didn't stick to it. When the older guys came up with a deal in our territory, they went to the boss and said, "Hey, we're not going to bring these two young kids in on this deal." And the boss said, "Okay." Well, like, hey, wait a second. The rules have to apply to everybody. And that's one of the things. When we had our system at MK, those rules applied to the kid who just started at the company as well as Paul and I. Everybody played by the same set of rules. And so I think you have to have a level playing field for everybody. And we just did the program the way it was intended to be implemented. Mm-hmm. And, we started to see results right off the bat. And yeah, when we started, CB had over 100 brokers. There were just 4 in building sales when I started, Paul and 3 other guys that had 20 years of experience. And we just stuck to the program, did what we needed to do. A year and a half later, we were made the bosses of the division. So those 3 guys with then, 22 years of experience were working for us, which they weren't very happy about. But, you had to do what you had to do.
Well, why do you think they made you the bosses? So you were in your 20s, right? And you probably hadn't sold anything like the volume that the guys had sold. But you were showing something that they weren't showing.
Yeah, no, look, our first year we didn't sell anything. Our second year, we made, I still remember, Paul and I each made $176,000, which in 1985 was a lot of money.
Yeah.
It was the top producers in the office at that time. And they saw the traction that we were getting with getting so many exclusive listings. In fact, they had us go around the country talking to offices, telling them what we were doing. We had people coming into New York. In fact, the first salesman we ever hired at MK was Ed Winslow, who was at CB in New Jersey. And Ed was coming in once a month. He'd come in on a Saturday. We'd sit in the office, and I went over everything that we were doing. And I remember we left CB on November 15th of 1988. November 16th, Ed called and said, "Hey, I heard you guys left to start your own company. I want to come work with you." And about a month later, we hired him. And, that was just, I think the reason that we were promoted was because of the results that we had been producing. And again, it's not rocket science. We got our 3-ring binders out and we turned the pages and we made the calls and we did, we created the market reports and we did all the basic fundamental things that we're still doing today. People say, "Bob, you've started a new company now. How's it going?" And I said, "Well, how's it going? I'm doing the same exact thing I've been doing for 40 years. It's nothing different. I have different tools today, maybe some different strategies and tactics, but essentially, real estate brokerage is a very, very simple business. It's just very hard.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same fundamental things that we were doing 40 years ago."
What was the light bulb moment that made you realize that it's controlling the inventory is key, getting the exclusive and getting hired by the seller is going to be the key to your success?
It was our first deal. The first deal Paul and I ever did was actually buy a rep. And I remember that deal, 1421 3rd Avenue. It was a 20,000 square foot vacant furniture showroom. And we were representing this company, American Medical International, and they were looking for a building to house the first MRI facility in New York City. And I remember the building couldn't be too close to the subway because the magnetic pull from the subway would interfere with the machine and all these other things. But the trials and tribulations we went through on that deal and the seller's agent telling us, oh, well, we have another buyer and the other buyer, and we're like, oh, what's going on? And we just said at the end of that deal, we said, you know what, we were so lucky that this deal closed. We don't want to have to rely on luck for the rest of our life. And we said, you know, buyer brokerage is a very, very low probability business. Let's represent the seller and only represent the seller. And that became our value proposition. We only sell properties. We only represent sellers. We only work on exclusives. We only work in your neighborhood. Took 6 seconds to say that. It was nothing ambiguous or vague about it. And that was the cornerstone of our approach to the business, and it remains that way today.
Wow, I'd love to jump in a time machine and go back and see what it's like. I know I hear a lot of the stories, but to be there, that's been quite amazing. So looking forward to the future with your new company, congrats. AI is a big buzzword right now, and a lot of people are trying to implement it into their business. I'm just curious to see what you feel like the future is like for real estate brokerage in New York.
Yeah, I think it's going to change so dramatically. You know, when I started in '84, no fax machine, no cell phone, no computer on my desk. We carried rolls of quarters around to go to the payphone on the corner and call people.
Wow.
And so over the past 40 years, the world has changed so dramatically. But I think the extent to which the world is going to change over the next 5 years is going to blow away the change from the last 40. And you know, it's interesting. We are, I would say, at the cutting edge of utilizing new technologies today. But I myself, I'm the least technologically savvy person you'll ever meet. I'm happy I get my cell phone to turn on in the morning. But I'm a big fan of this great writer, Benjamin Hardy. And he's written a series of books with Dan Sullivan. And one of those books is called Who Not How. And the thesis of the book is when you say to yourself, oh, that's a great idea, how am I going to do that? You're asking the wrong question. You should say, that's a great idea. Who am I going to get to do that for me?
Okay.
So realizing that technology was going to be so important, the first thing I did when I started my new firm was go out and hire a COO that from the tech world. Seth Samowitz is my COO. He started AI companies before. He worked at a driverless car company for 6 years. So I figured this guy can make a car drive itself. He can help me sell some buildings.
I've met him a few times. He's a good guy.
Yeah, great guy. And he has a real estate background as well.
He's all in on this AI angle.
All in.
Okay.
So we're using AI in 3 main ways. We're using AI with respect to prospecting, for deal execution, and for data interpretation. And I think the most powerful application of AI is in data interpretation, but it's going to be the hardest for the real estate industry to take advantage of because most data sets in the industry are not very good.
Do you feel like the big companies are having that vision as well and trying to execute that?
They may. I think that the big companies may be a little apprehensive about utilizing AI because it really marginalizes the need for a broker to be at a big global shop.
Yeah. Okay.
Johnny or Sally could be sitting in their mom's basement as a single person shop and appear to be a big global company today with AI. But I think that what I've seen, my experience with the big shops has been that there tends to be quite a bit of turnover in the research department. And the interesting thing about real estate data is that absolute numbers mean very little. What matters is the relationship between numbers in a data set. So, for instance, if I tell you that in 2019, there was $26.3 billion in sales volume in Manhattan, you really may not know what to think about that.
You're right.
But if I say, but at the peak of the market in 2015, it was $57.4 billion. And in 2020, during COVID, at the bottom of the market, it was $11.1 billion. All of a sudden, the 26.3 starts to have some feel to it.
You have a point of reference, right?
And so it's the relationship between that. Are the numbers going up or down? To what extent are they going up or down? That gives you the sense of what the market is. But if the methodology for calculating the data is not the same, the integrity in the relationship between the numbers completely falls apart. And I've seen these big companies that have different heads of research, and they have a different approach to calculating data. So if I say to you, hey, what are the average cap rates? Or figure out the cap rate on this deal, the first thing you're going to ask me is, well, you want me to use trailing 12, Forward 12? What do you want me to do with projections, vacancies? Do I make projections? How do I come up with the projections? What's the stabilized vacancy increase? And I've seen people who have very different ideas about what the right thing is. So if you have one number that was calculated based on trailing 12 and another number that was calculated based on forward 12, everything falls apart.
You're hitting on a really interesting point because, so we cover specific markets, right? The Bronx, Upper Manhattan, we came out of that B6, Massey Knakal, like focus on areas. And it's like every broker now has their own report. And we're looking at some of our other firms' reports, and it's like, are they even looking at the same market? It's like they have a total different number and a total different metric for measuring what's going on. And I feel like obviously we're all looking at the same real estate market. They're smart. They're tracking the same sales. But the ones that at least I'm tracking internally, I just have a total different take on. Like
well, Brian, you have to have your own proprietary data. I'm a big proponent of having proprietary data. And the methodology for calculating the data has to be the same. If you have a store on the ground floor and 10 apartments above, is that a walk-up apartment building or is that a mixed-use building? If you say, well, it has retail on the ground, that's a mixed-use building. Okay, well, the Empire State Building has stores on the ground floor. Is that a mixed-use building or is that an office building? How are you categorizing these, right? So, in fact, it's this inability to get good data from the market was really the reason why I came up with the Knakal map room, because I said I saw a lot of land. In order to evaluate land properly, you need to know what the pipeline is of new construction that's going on, and how am I going to be able to evaluate land if I don't know what else is being built in the neighborhood? And the data sets are remarkably scarce for New York. You have pretty good data sets for condo construction, but in terms of rentals, hotels, offices, other types of properties, very, very little exists. And even within the condo sector, which every residential firm does it, one firm will say there's 6,000 units under construction. The other firm says there's 9,000 units under construction. So it comes down to, when do you start counting? When do you stop counting? When is a project completed? When is it not complete? And so, again, you have to have apples to apples comparison. So I went out and I counted every building. I said, if I'm standing in front of a building and I see a crane moving around, it's obviously under construction, right? So I went out, looked at it, did a walking tour of Manhattan, counted every building, highlighted the Sanborn map. And so now we have the development pipeline in Manhattan, south of 96th Street and 110, down to the square inch for each of those 5 buckets.
You can't get that on CoStar. You can't get that anywhere, right? So this is proprietary to you. And this is where I feel like the art comes into tracking your market, right? And not the science, because there is no physical way that map room could be replicated through just third-party aggregating of data. You have to get out there. You have to drive the blocks. You have to look. You said about looking at a crane. I mean, who else has done this? This is like...
No, that's right. So I was a 59-year-old guy at the time, out there walking around. And you know what? Anybody could do it. Anybody could do it. I spent 220 hours in the field walking around. Anybody could go do it. But first of all, during normal times, it's hard to find the time to go do that.
Right.
The pandemic was the perfect time. I had wanted to do it for 10 years, but who the heck has the time to do that? But the pandemic was the perfect time.
This was something on your mind to do?
For 10 years, I wanted to.
So it was like something that was there.
Well, I'll tell you. So March 12th, 2020, JLL says, okay, guys, we want you to go home for 2 weeks, let this thing blow over, then you come back. So I went home that night, and my doctor called me and said, Bob, there's a rumor going around that the city is going to be quarantined. They're going to shut the bridges and tunnels, quarantine Manhattan, get out of town tonight. Within an hour, I have my wife and my daughter in the car. We're going up to the country house in Connecticut. And 2 weeks later, it was very obvious that we weren't going to be back and things weren't going to get back to normal. So we had left in such haste that I had to drive back into the city to pick up some things. And I pull off the FDR Drive, and it was like a science fiction movie. There was nobody. There were no cars. There were no stores open, no people walking around, no dogs walking. There's nothing. And it occurred to me, like in a second, I said, this is the time I got to go count buildings. So I called up my team. I said, guys, get into the office tomorrow. We're going to make copies of the Sanborn map. And every week I came down from Connecticut, got in the car, I'd drive to point A, get out of the car, leave the car in the middle of 3rd Avenue, and walk around for a half hour, drive down to another point, get out, walk around for a half hour. And in about 4 months, we had covered the whole island of Manhattan, south of 96th and 110. And I didn't intend to actually tape the map together. We just were using it rather than write stuff down. I said, let me just color the map. It'll be so much easier. And then I started to say, well, let's see what's happening in this neighborhood. Let's see what's happening in that neighborhood. I taped 2 or 3 pieces of it together over here, 2 or 3 pieces over there. Before you know it, I had this 24-foot long map.
That's amazing.
And
I love that you physically taped this together.
Yeah,
Like, that is...
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Over the course of my career, I've successfully won 26% of my pitches. In the map room today, I'm 25 for 25. Not lost a pitch. And I'm telling you, it's because of that map, because somebody comes in and says, tell me about what's happening with the development market, what's my property worth. We can identify every potential competing project, every comparable sale, everything you could possibly want to know about that market is on this giant piece of paper. And I know I'm going to lose some deals, and that's okay, but the win rate, because of this data set, this big giant piece of paper, has been really great. So it's been the greatest thing I've ever done in my career, and I only wish I had done it 30 years ago.
I think it's genius. And I think, like you said, the option was there for everybody to do it, right? Anyone could have went out and created this map room, stitched it together. If I had described it to you before or to somebody else before, they've said, no, that will never work. All the information is already available.
Yeah.
But it's when you go out and you actually can say with your hand in your heart, I actually drove these blocks, I walked them, I saw them, and I know exactly what's going on. That's what makes the difference. And now you've made an event out of it, which is key, because now they have to come in, right? You're going to chat with them. I'm sure you're going to have like a whole day around it, and it's kind of a fun event for everyone. And because you've put it out there and you've created it, other people have now jumped on it as well and was like, oh, I was invited to the Knakal map room, or I know where the Knakal map room is. So you've created a little bit of mystery about it, which is key, and you've really made it like a staple for any developer.
Everyone's excited to go there.
Yeah. We got to get our invite, right, Bob?
Absolutely. Yeah, you guys are welcome anytime.
Thank you. Yes, finally.
Can we bring clients?
Absolutely.
No, but that's amazing, and I think that's all ties nicely into prospecting as well, and how you can really do something a little bit different, maybe, right, than what you've been doing: calls, emails, meetings. When you create something like a map room, it kind of people remember you for that, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I always say that the real estate business is not really the real estate business; it's the information and relationship business. And that's, again, why proprietary data is so important, because you want to have something nobody else has. If you're going to a third-party aggregator and pulling a report, a high school kid could do that. You're a real estate professional, and you're going to use a data set that some high school kid could go get?
Right.
That's not of value. How do you create value? Have something where you've created input into that. Maybe you use that data set from the third-party aggregator as a base, but then you add to it. Why is a principal going to give someone who works at a third-party aggregator the inside information on transactions they've done? There's no incentive to do that. And there's every incentive for the third-party aggregator to just fill in boxes, because their grading is based on how many boxes they fill in. How accurate is that information?
True.
I feel like brokers in general are pretty, there should be more brokers out there with your mentality in terms of digging deep into the data. I think a lot of them can be a little bit lazy, but the thing I would say I learned from data is that, it's the buyer and the seller, why they're buying, why they're selling, are there errors available? So you've got to go deep, and understand that market and that knowledge and convey it to the client, as you mentioned.
And I think that's one thing that, you've done really nicely in the Bronx as well, is it's not only like, land is trading at $80 a billable square foot, but this property sold at $110 a billable square foot. When you're actually sitting down with an owner, and obviously they want to point to the highest comp, it's nice, and I've seen you do it, to be able to say, well, this one sold at 110 because there was a non-profit or somebody who is working with like federal money
Yeah,
that can
exactly.
pay a little bit more than say a mom and pop who's trying to build a rental
Yeah,
building.
it's not only about what the deal was and what the price was, but why was the price
Why?
the price,
Right.
right? Was there
Yeah.
gold on the property? Was an oil well
Right.
underneath?
Right.
Why did somebody pay that? And then sometimes there are reasons, external reasons why someone was induced to pay the price that they paid.
Mm-hmm.
As a professional who's specializing in an area, an expert, you should know that. And if you can convey that, I love on development sites. That's why another reason why I love development sites so much is there's so much stuff that's below the radar screen. That you look at the sale price, you look at the buildable footage, and the whole market thinks you just divide the sale price by the buildable footage, and that's the value. But were there bonuses in place? Were there not bonuses in place? Did you have to buy the bonuses? How much did the bonuses cost? Did you have to pay for an easement? Did you have to pay for a right-of-way? Did you have to buy tenants out? What were the costs of those things? So all of a sudden, I sold a development site up on 77th Street and 2nd Avenue, and the real price per square foot is about $100 more than what the casual observer would think that was, because of all the additional costs that were involved in creating the site that exists there today. That is where the rubber meets the road in terms of being able to deliver real value to the client. And I've used that as a comp so many times, and clients have said, no, it was much less than that. It was, and I said, no, it wasn't. It was $3.5 million for the light and air easement to the north. It was $1.5 million for a first right of refusal on a building to the north that could have provided another driveway, and it was $10 million to buy 2 tenants out. This other deal, the other brokers don't know what they're talking about. Immediately, those other brokers are out.
Yeah.
And so that's the competitive advantage that proprietary data gives you.
Talking of development sites, which you've sold a lot of, what are your thoughts on the City of Yes, the new government initiative? Do you feel like that's going to be a boon for development in New York City?
I think it's great. I think anything that incentivizes the private sector to act is great. The private sector has tremendous dexterity. They'll do whatever they're incentivized to do. And from what I understand, City of Yes will pass by the end of the year, notwithstanding the challenges that the mayor is going through now. Which is very, very positive. And I think equally important is Midtown South rezoning, which I think also I expect to pass by the end of the first quarter of next year. That also will be significantly impactful on the city. But, we need to educate our politicians, our policymakers on the realities of the real estate market. And the fact that I think all of our housing policy issues get solved with more supply. Even if you're an elected official that believes that an economics 101 textbook is capitalist propaganda, all you have to do, don't look past the pandemic. People moved out of the city. Vacancy rose. Vacancy rising is like supply increasing. Supply increasing exerted downward pressure on rents to the point where rents dropped 30% in Manhattan during the pandemic. There is not a housing policy that's been implemented anywhere in the United States that has made rents go down 10%, let alone 30%. So why don't our policymakers get it through their head? We have to create more supply. They all say, we want New York to be more affordable for everybody. Well, it's the height of hypocrisy that every single piece of legislation that's been implemented or ignored since 2018 has done nothing but constricted supply and raised rents, making the city less affordable for everybody. So if you are a free market tenant in New York City and you pay too much rent, it's your local politician's fault. Go blame them. They're the ones. It's your council person, your assembly person, your senator, your mayor, your governor. We need more supply. It would solve all the problems.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, they messed it up. There's no two ways about it, right? 2019, they were trying to make a big statement, and they just went way too far. And I think it was just through a lack of understanding of something like you said about like incentivizing the private sector to do the right thing. You completely disincentivized.
Well, look, here's a perfect example is the MCI and the IAI program, right? Go back to 1978. Yankees and Dodgers in the World Series. It could be a Yankee and Dodger World Series again. I hope it's,
love
it's
that you know
Yankees
that.
and Mets, but this is 1978 Yankees Dodgers. Reggie Jackson is hitting all these home runs. The Goodyear blimp is above Yankee Stadium, and it pans out. There are 6 fires going on within 3 blocks of Yankee Stadium. And the famous announcer, Howard Cosell, says, "The Bronx is burning." Why was the Bronx burning? The Bronx was burning because at that time, it made more sense for people to burn their buildings down than to invest in them. And so you had a scenario where in 1978, the dilapidation rate in New York City was 14%, meaning 14% of the apartments were deemed uninhabitable because the condition was so crappy. So the city implements the MCI, Major Capital Improvement Program, and the Individual Apartment Improvement Program, the IAI program, to incentivize the private sector to invest in the housing stock. So what happens? Private sector dumps tens of billions of dollars into the housing stock. In 2019, the dilapidation rate, 0.04%. And what do these knucklehead policymakers do? They marginalize both of those programs to the extent that now, when a stabilized apartment becomes vacant, it's in the owner's best interest to nail the door shut rather than to renovate it. So you have tens of thousands of apartments. Some estimates are as high as 80,000 apartments that are sitting empty. When rents are too high for people, the quality of buildings is deteriorating, and all you have to do is reinstate the MCI and the IAI. You'd have tens of thousands of apartments under gut renovation within 2 weeks. How much flooring are you going to sell? How much sheetrock? How many sinks, refrigerators, tubs? How much of this, how economically stimulative
the knock-on
would that
benefits
be?
to all the third-party providers and everyone else.
Not that you have a crystal ball, but do you feel like the policymakers are going to have to make a change in the near future?
Unfortunately, buildings don't deteriorate that rapidly,
Yeah, it's
so
gonna take
this
a
is
while.
something that happens very slowly. But you would have to think that they would say, hey, you know what, instead, what they're talking about is taxing people who keep apartments vacant. I mean, come on, get with the program. You can't, what folks try to do, because they think they'll get more votes this way, is confiscate private property and tell people what they can do with their private property instead of creating more property.
Right.
You need more supply. It's that simple. You can't keep saying, well, you own the building, I'm going to restrict everything you can do to create a disincentive for you to create a nice living environment for the people living in your building rather than creating new supply. And why is that? I'll tell you why that is. And it's really illustrated in a story that involves my friend Elliot Spitzer, who was the governor of New York at one time when Atlantic Yards was being rezoned. When Atlantic Yards was being rezoned, the local council person and the rezoning of Atlantic Yards had planned 9,000 apartments, 25% of which were going to be affordable. So about 2,300 affordable units in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. Local council person votes against it. Elliot is outraged. Calls the council person into it, and I'm saying council person because she's still very prominent in New York politics. Elliot calls her into his office, says, this is 2,300 affordable apartments in your district. Why would you vote against this? She says, Governor, last council race, 7,000 people voted. You're talking about bringing 25,000 people potentially into my district that don't know me and might not vote for me. That is crazy.
This is literally what we're dealing with.
That's what we're dealing with. Yeah. But we need more supply, and we have to, I say, extend the term for council people by 50% so they can stay in longer, but they can't run for re-election. You get one term. Your term limited out after one term. Do what's right for your constituents, not what you think is going to help you get re-elected.
You have incredible wealth of knowledge in the sector. Do you consult with the public officials, or is that something you would?
No, I talk to them all the time. I try to talk to public
or?
officials all the time. I have had lunch with the governor, with the mayor. I try to talk to them. Look, I love the city. I've lived here since 1984. I've worked here. I was not, lured away during the pandemic to go work in Florida or Texas, like other
As tempting as that
brokers
may
did.
be.
Yeah, I've stayed in New York. I love the city. The city's the greatest place in the world, greatest city in the world. I want the city to be better. What I don't understand is that our elected officials look at real estate guys as the bad guy. You know, who the heck in the country tells Amazon to go away when they want to bring 40,000 jobs here? And you know, the real victims of Amazon not coming here are the children and the grandchildren of the people who live in the projects in Long Island City that would have been occupying tens of thousands of jobs to support the Amazon jobs, working in the bakeries and the delis and the shoe shine place and the other vital services that would support all those Amazon jobs. How could you not want that? So you know, I think that when you look at the city and the vibrancy of the city has to grow, and you know, we need policies that are very pro-development. And for the real estate business, how could you think real estate guys are the bad guys when the real estate industry contributes 54% to the city budget? In terms of real estate taxes, transfer taxes, mortgage recording taxes, other charges and fees, 54%. And the real estate guys are the bad guys? Like some politicians won't even take a campaign contribution from a real estate guy. You got to be kidding me. If I'm a policymaker, I want the business community to thrive. I want the real estate community to thrive. Then if I have pet projects, I want to do certain things to help certain constituencies around town. I need the money to do it. The more money I have, the more I can do to help people. You need those sectors to really be doing well, to have the money to do whatever else you want to do. But if you don't have the funds, you can't do anything.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I feel like we're like in a really tumultuous time right now, right? So it's October 2024, right? We got an election coming up in a couple of weeks. I think we're more focused for our business on what happens locally, right? I think you could probably draw a little bit of sentiment from what happens nationally at the presidential level. And people are weirdly saying that, like, oh, we're waiting until after the election to make any decisions, or we're just going to wait and see. So I think that tells me that people want to get a sense of what the pulse of the population is right now. Is it more pro-business? Is it more pro-regulation? Like, what is it? In New York City, though, we definitely are, like, I mean, it just feels like since we got into the business, Mitch, right? It's been one hit after the next. People telling us about the good old days. I always say it's like Tony Soprano in the first episode of The Sopranos. Sometimes I feel like I'm 20 years too late to the party. You know, we've never really seen this, like, 2000 and, you know, 5, 6, where it was just like...
No, guys, look, it hasn't been great here since 2015. That's the reality. In October, beginning of October of 2015 was when the market started to change. And it hasn't been great. We've had some really, really spectacular times in the city, but it's really been back to 2015 when things were really, really great. We had a pretty decent 12 months, second half of 21, first half of 22, but that was very short-lived. It's going to come back. It's going to come back, but we have the political pendulum is very, very heavy. It's going to swing back, but you know, the New York State Assembly was always very, very supermajority anti-real estate people. For the first time ever, we have an anti-real estate supermajority in the Senate, which is problematic. So it's going to take a while for that pendulum. The pendulum's heavy, it's going to swing, but you look at the people who are buying apartment buildings today in the city, they are buying them based on the belief that the pendulum will swing. Because otherwise there's no reason to buy apartment buildings in the city today. But that pendulum is heavy. It's going to take a while to swing. But ultimately, because of the regulations, I believe that the quality of life for people living in rent-regulated housing is going to fall to a terrible position because there's no incentive for private landlords to invest in their buildings. At some point, the tenants are going to get pissed off and are going to say to their local official, look, my building's falling apart. And if the industry does a good job of public relations in terms of explaining why this is happening, people should get pissed off at their elected official because it's the policy that these people have made that create the disincentive to invest in the housing stock that leads to the deterioration of the buildings, which leads to a lower quality of life living in these buildings. And people have to get vocal. It's really the biggest problem we have in New York City is voter apathy. 16% of registered voters vote in New York. That's abysmal. We need people to, if you live in the city, you got to encourage your family to vote, encourage your coworkers to vote. Anybody that lives in the city, encourage them to vote, because that's the way we'll effectuate great change. Again, I'm not saying who to vote for, but become aware of the policies. Yeah. You got to get out there and vote. We can't have 16% of our population voting. If you didn't vote and you're unhappy, it's your own fault.
Agreed.
So we are in New York City. New young people come here all the time. Me and Brian are examples of that. Where do you think the buying opportunities are? And obviously touched on rent stabilization, if you feel like that's a pendulum swing that might swing the other way. But what other asset classes or locations?
Mitch, I think that generally this is the best buying opportunity I've ever seen.
Wow.
And for decades...
That's a big statement.
Yeah, for decades I've said the S&L crisis was the best buying opportunity. But when I look at the market today and I see buildings selling at a price per square foot that's the same that it was 20 or 25 years ago, I say, look, if you're a believer in New York City, you should be buying everything in sight today. And I guarantee you, 2027, 28, 29, well, you're going to be talking to clients and they're going to say, oh, God, I really screwed up. I should have bought everything in sight in 2023 and 2024 and 2025, because you're not going to see pricing like this again, where you're buying buildings for a fraction of their replacement cost. You're buying property for less than the land value. You're getting the building for free and you're getting the land at a discount. How could you not buy that if you believe in the future of the city?
That's the big bet, isn't it? It's like, will it come back? And
It definitely will come back. Look, never bet against New York. New York is tough as nails. I remember probably the biggest inflection point Massey Knakal ever had, and the thing that really got us to the level where we were eating everybody's lunch, was right after 9/11. After 9/11, every company was downsizing, and people were being laid off. And Paul and I looked at each other and we said, you know what? This city's tough. We're going to come back. We're going to rebound from this. Look at all these great quality people that are being laid off, brokers and accountants and attorneys and bankers. Let's go hire all these people and turn them into brokers. And up to that point, we were interviewing everybody ourselves, and we said, look, let's go out, hire a director of HR and hire all these people. And so 9/11, we had 21 people. 2 years later, we were 150. And we went all in. And you know what? If the market didn't rebound, we would have been out of business. But we just believed so strongly in the strength of New York that we decided to go for it. And, so by 2004, we had, we were robust. We had 150 people. We were in every market. And the market starts to come roaring back. And other companies wake up and say, hey, we laid everybody off. Let's go start hiring people. We had hired them 2 years ago. And by the time everything started to recover, we just, that 04, 05, 06, 07, forget about it. We were just...
You had the head start on everybody.
We had... The boots were on the ground already. The people had a couple of years under their belt. And it was just... That was a glorious time for us.
You had we read about it. And one of the main reasons... or one of the reasons I got into the business. So I got here in 2010 from Ireland and, worked in different jobs for a few years. But in 2016, I was reading articles about you and Paul. I think Paul was running for mayor at the time. So MK had basically had its run, the sale had been made to Cushman. And I felt like it was just like, oh man, that was a company I would have loved to work for, right? It was owned by local guys. It seemed like there was a lot of partners that benefited from the sale. The MK legacy is everywhere, right? I haven't walked into a company yet in New York City that there hasn't been someone who has the roots back to MK. And I think that's testament to you and Paul to your belief in New York, your belief in the people in New York, and you made a lot of careers in this city.
Yeah, Brian, I will tell you, it's I think our belief and love of New York was a big part of it. I think our servant leadership management style was a lot of it too. I think that, interestingly, every company out there talks about servant leadership. But if you're not giving feedback to people constantly, you're not a servant leader. If you're not encouraging people to do well, you're not a servant leader. If you're not letting people know how impactful what they're doing is having on the success of the company, you're not a servant leader. We did all those things. We made people feel like, hey, what you're doing is really helping us achieve our objectives, and you're doing a great job. But you can do better. We all can do better. And so encouraging people to do better than their best, making them become aware of how important what they were doing was to, whether it's people, and not just the top producers, but people in the mailroom, the receptionists. We said to the receptionists, hey, we love what you're doing. People walk in here, you greet them with a smile, you ask them if they want water or coffee, you have them sit down. Usually, the people would walk into the office for 2 months after that. They were greeted like their long-lost aunt or uncle, right? And what that did, I think, it made people want to be better.
Yeah.
It made people want to do a better job for their clients. And so I look back on the Massey Knakal days, a tremendous amount of fond memories. CoStar started tracking the market in 2001. From 2001 to 2014, the number 2 company in New York had sold 1,300 buildings. We sold over 4,000. We sold the business in 2014 for $100 million. 2 great achievements. But the thing I'm most proud of about the Massey Knakal days is if you look at the New York City investment sales landscape today, there are 30 companies that are either owned by or run by people that learn the business at Massey Knakal. Show
crazy.
me any other market in the country where that has happened.
Yeah. And owners and buyers, because we used to leverage it at B6, right? That it was, we're with Paul Massey, and, that was like one of the partners of Massey Knakal. I was like, every owner in the borough, whether it's Brooklyn, the Bronx, Queens, downtown, uptown, everyone remembers the mailers, the OVs,
the green signs,
the cold calls. Like you guys really, and Paul says this a lot as well, and I can tell you're of a similar mindset. You changed the world in our world anyway, in how brokerage is done in New York City.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned all the mail we sent, and we were sending out, before email really became popular, we were sending out 3 million pieces of mail a year. And it's interesting. I am representing Related and Sterling Equities in Willets Point, and we were helping them with the assemblage for the new soccer stadium out there. And I was talking. If you've never been to Willets Point, it's like a third world country in a lot of ways. There are streets that are not paved. There are buildings that don't have utilities. There are generators out front for electricity. And you have these one-off owners that own these properties and everything. And I'd call them up and say, hey, it's Bob Knakal from the Old Co. And they say, Old Co? What the heck is Old Co? I'm like, Bob Knakal, you remember Massey Knakal? Oh, yeah, the green and white guys. The green and white guys. I haven't gotten mail from you in a while. What's going on? So literally, when I was making my calls to try to get properties freed up for Related and Sterling Equities, I'd call and say, "This is Bob Knakal from Massey Knakal," and everybody knew who I was, and because of all the mail that we barraged into this neighborhood. So it was a very, very simple formula, but there's a lot of stickiness to all of that saturation in the market.
Especially those older owners who are, they're not. They're busy running their business. They mightn't necessarily be of a generation that uses email or uses social media. Those guys they're still throwing it in the trash, but I still think it comes in, they're looking at it.
No, but Brian, I love that, and I use that as an analogy all the time. Okay, so I'm an owner. I own in New York City, and in New York, in Manhattan, the average turnover rate over 40 years has been 2.6%. In the outer boroughs, 2.2%. So that means that if I bought a property in Manhattan, I'm selling it in 40 years on average. And if I'm in the outer boroughs, I'm selling it, about every 50 years.
Yeah.
So if I get mail from somebody and I pick it up and I say, oh, Bob Knakal, Massey Knakal, boom, and I throw it in the garbage. To me, that is success. That's success because next month, oh, Bob Knakal, man, boom. Oh, Bob Knakal, boom.
He's expecting it.
Bob Knakal, boom. And all of a sudden, the guy gets a phone call. Hey, so sorry, your partner just died. And he was the one feeding the building. You got to sell. I got to sell the building? Let me call that guy Knakal sending me all this stuff.
The green and white, the Bob.
That's what you want. You want to be top of mind. So how do you be top of mind? If somebody's only going to transact once every 45 or 40 or 50 years, you got to be top of mind. So I thought, get my mail, look at it, and throw it in the trash. I love that. That was success.
That was success. That's really interesting to hear because, intuitively you would think like, oh, I'm spending so much money on this mail. I hope they keep it. But really, people aren't going to keep it. And probably most likely the best thing you could hope for is that they look at it, recognize it, and then throw it away.
Yeah, but Brian, you know what? If they found out yesterday that their partner died, they would look at it and they'd leaf through it and say, well, what's my building worth? Maybe I could. But just planting the seed, hey, I'm here. This is what I do. The constant reminder, throw it out every month. But then when you have a need, call me before you call anybody else.
Gotcha. So the times are changing constantly and we have to evolve. The territory network, I feel like worked, and this is totally open to debate, but it worked when you started. Does it still work now?
I think it's very different. I will tell you, I think the geographic territory orientation worked really well in the 80s and 90s because publicly available information was very opaque and very inaccurate. Today, I think product specialization is more important, but I think within product specialization, you also have to work in a defined geographic area. You have to have a value proposition that you can articulate to people and say, hey, I only sell this type of deal in this neighborhood, this area, whatever. The more narrowly you define what you do, the more of an expert you really can be. If you tear your ACL in your knee and you go to some doctor and you say, I do all kinds of surgeries. I do knee ACLs, elbow ACLs, shoulder. I don't even know if you have an ACL in your shoulder. I do everything: fingers, toes, wrists, everything.
Yeah.
I can do it. I can do it.
Right.
And then you talk to a guy and say, I've done 14,372 knee ACLs. It's all I do.
That's your guy.
Who are you going to?
Yeah, that's your guy. Yeah. And I think you need a critical mass of sales to do that. We might be a little bit light when we try to do that right now, but I definitely feel like it's something we're moving towards. It's like, okay, so we know certain neighborhoods, we know boroughs, we know where we are, but within that then development, multifamily, retail, what's going on in each food group. And I really do think that's strategically how we're trying to build it, that although our roots are in these neighborhoods, we're trying to layer it with that product specialization.
Yeah, you could position it any number of ways. Look, it's very rare that somebody is going to go into your total background and proctologize every single deal you've done. So what's your value proposition you're going to articulate to somebody who owns a certain type of property? You have to figure that out. And yes, there's a little bit of art to this, and you can kind of massage it a little bit, but the more focused you can be in terms of what you do and what you can do for that particular client, the much better result you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what every broker wants. You want to be the doctor who only does knee ACLs, right? And if you can't be that, then be the guy who only does ACLs. Or be the guy who only does a certain type of surgery, or the guy who only does surgeries in this neighborhood, or whatever it is. You have to have something, some story that you can convey that makes somebody say, you know what, I like that. I'm going to work with this guy.
Be the guy, be the girl, whatever it is, be the person that emulates that business. And I think that's that's what I guess everybody is trying to do.
I think this year was a good example of that. Like the beginning of the year was pretty quiet for me, and then the 485X program came out in the summer, whenever it was, springtime, and it was like a light switch. So many developers looking for opportunities. Because I've sold a lot of development product in the Bronx, so I think that's a good example of just like being known for something and doing the same thing over again. At the same time, having the ability to pivot and kind of follow the market where the opportunity is. But yeah, we buy into the ethos. We 100% agree with what you're saying.
Bob, can I ask you something personally where it's like, just from the outside, so like you as a businessman and Paul as a businessman, you've like been to the highest peaks of this business, right? You've grown a business, I think it was 27, 28 years, right? Massey Knakal.
26 years and 46 days, but who's counting?
Who's counting? But you've done it all. You had nothing left to prove, and you had the dream exit. I feel like nobody gets that kind of exit in this business, right? You're only as good as your relationship, your own personal book. You managed to create it, sell it, monetize it, and you sold at the top of the market, and delighted you did, and that's amazing. But then we've watched you, so Massey Knakal ended around 2014. You sold, and you went institutional, so you've been in a different side of the business, and it seems like you've come full circle now again to starting BK REA, and Mitch and me we're 30 years behind you, and we're seeing how hard this is, right? We're in there early, we're in there late, we're trying to go out at night, we're trying to get clients. We're like, this is so hard all the time. We're dealing with deals, we're dealing with HR, we're dealing with training, we're dealing with everything. And sometimes we joke around Paul and Bob have done all of this, have exited at the best exit you could hope for. And then I saw a picture of you a couple of weeks back in your new office, and it was pretty much just you, and you were on the phone, and it was clearly an office in growth mode. Around, your guys were around you, and it was just how does he do this? And the same thing for Paul over at B6. It's growth mode again, a whole new cycle. I mean, where does that come from?
Brian, I don't know. I just say that, I feel truly blessed that, I got into the real estate business by accident. Wanted to be an investment banker, thought Coldwell Banker was a bank. There's, you could see the stories, in many different areas. But I just love the business. I think that, for me, it's a vocation and it's a hobby. My life is very simple. I have a wife and a 15-year-old daughter, and try to spend as much time as possible with them. I sell buildings. I go to the gym. I go to church. That's my life. And I think that, people have asked me this question, Bob, what keeps you going? What drives you? And I think it's kind of like when, psychiatrists talk about kids on their cell phones today and this dopamine rush that they get from seeing stuff on the phone. And I think in the same way, I get that dopamine rush from the real estate business. If you think about it, in the life cycle of a transaction, right? You call up an owner, or they call you and say, hey, I want to sell my building. That's a rush. Go pitch the business. Yeah. And they say, I'm hiring you. Yeah. It's a rush.
That might be the best part.
And then you reach agreement on the terms and conditions. Send me a contract. You get a rush. Yeah. Sign the contract. Get a rush. Close a deal. Get a rush. And that's one deal out of 50 you're working on. And it's just the positive feedback is so great. I just, I really, really love the business. People say, Bob, why don't you slow down? Why don't you take it easy? A lot of folks my age have retired. And I just say, you know what? I'm not doing manual labor. I talk to people for a living. I'm never going to retire. I've already told my wife, when they stick me in the ground, I'll have deals under contract. You'll have to go collect the commissions. And I just love it. I really love it. It's it's kind of, I don't know if when you were kids you ever played Monopoly, but there were times when you got in this really great game and the game lasted 2 or 3 days and you were really into it. I'm playing Monopoly. It's just so much fun. And, I'm just very, very lucky. I found something. I stumbled into something that, I truly love and never want to stop doing.
It's addictive, and we admire the passion you have for the business. It's very inspirational for us.
On behalf of a whole generation of brokers, we want to thank you for everything you've done, for providing a roadmap to us, for your generosity and your time, and just in sharing all the information. And it's an amazing story, and we're so grateful for everything you've done for our industry and this business.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And you guys, Mitch, Brian, if there's any way I can help you guys in any way, this is awesome that you're doing this. Awesome that you have such passion for the business. I wish you the best of luck, and hope you go out there and kill it. And I hope you guys someday you have sold 3,000 properties.
I love it. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.